This is the video for East Asia. In this video, we're going to cover China, Mongolia, Korea, Japan, and Tibet. Here is a map of East Asia. As you can see, the center of this map is dominated by China, which includes Tibet at the bottom left-hand corner. North of China, you'll see Mongolia, and to the east, Korea, and Japan. East Asia has a population of approximately 1.68 billion people. China exerts a tremendous influence in this region geographically, politically, and culturally. There are dynasties and histories of emperors in this area that go back generations and millennia. It's an area where tradition meets modern times, and there's a rapid degree of change and westernization in this area. We will start with China, where we'll hear 4 different listening examples. First, the Guqin, an ancient zither. After that, Sizhu, a silk and bamboo ensemble. Then 2 examples of opera from China, Beijing opera and revolutionary opera. First, a little on the background of China. It is the world's most populous country with 1.2 billion people. It has an ideographic writing system with characters like the one that you see there on the right. And philosophy is an important stream in China's history, going back to Confucianism and Taoism, as well as Buddhism. And China became a communist country in the year 1948. Let's begin with the Guqin. Our first impressions are that it's a very quiet and intimate instrument. It has 7 strings, and it's a zither with no frets, so you can slide up and down the board of the instrument and slide between tones. Remember that a zither is part of the chordophone classification system, and a zither describes any instrument from which the strings are horizontal, and it's played with a free rhythm. Cultural considerations. This instrument is a scholar's and philosopher's instrument. As a matter of fact, China's most important philosopher, Confucius, was a great Guqin player, and he wrote a very famous song called The Orchid, where he compared himself like an orchid discarded by the side of a road, because many of his philosophies were ignored by his present-day political rulers. It's a kind of sonic meditation, and the notation for Guqin is on the right, but it's not as prescriptive as Western notation. The musician has a lot of room for interpretation. Many Chinese pieces, especially those for the Guqin, are programmatic, and they represent scenes in nature often. It is one of the world's oldest zithers and the model for the more recent and more modern Guqin, which has 21 to 26 strings. It's influenced every other zither in Korea and Japan and other parts of East and Southeast Asia, and may have influenced many other zithers that are played today, including the lap steel guitar. Zithers are found in many Chinese films, including Kung Fu Hustle, which I've included a clip near the end of this video. Let's go on to our next example. Sizhu is a silk and bamboo ensemble. First impressions is that there's a clear melodic line with a flowing, almost improvisatory feel. There is a system of instrument classification in China called Beijing. And in ancient times, instruments were made out of 8 different materials: stone, metal, gourd, skin, wood, clay, silk, and bamboo. This ensemble is one that every instrument in the ensemble is constructed out of silk or bamboo. There's one basic melody for which each instrument does their own interpretation with ornamentation and different rhythm. That creates a heterophonic structure. And there is a clear beat to this music once it gets going. Here are 2 important Sizhu instruments. The pipa on the left is a 4-string lute, very highly virtuosic, and the ditsi on the right is a transverse flute. There is silk on one of the holes in this instrument. It's not a hole that's played, and this silk provides a slightly buzzy quality to this instrument. 2 other Sizhu instruments in the silk family are the yangqin, which is a hammered zither or hammered dulcimer, and the erhu, which is a 2-string fiddle played upright. A difference between the erhu and other fiddles is that the bow is stuck between the 2 strings. So to play one of the strings, you pull the bow toward you, and to play the other string, you push it away from you. It's a beautiful instrument, and many people feel that the erhu is the instrument that comes closest to mimicking the human voice. Cultural considerations for silk and bamboo music and connections. There are different regional styles associated with this music. And this is not professional musicians. These are amateurs that get together in the backs of restaurants as a social club to enjoy the music. So they're not playing to an audience. They're basically playing for their own enjoyment. In many ways, this is comparable to how bluegrass music is played in the United States, where musicians can join any ensemble and there's a stock repertoire of tunes that everyone knows, and musicians are interchangeable. And this ensemble became the basis for the modern 20th century Chinese orchestra. Let's explore Beijing opera now. This is only one of many different styles of opera you find in various regions of China, but it's probably the most famous. Our first impressions are of nasally voices and instruments, and the rising and falling of loud gongs in the background. The Jinggu and melodic ensemble, the Jinggu is on the right, plays during the singing, and the melody follows the tonal contour of the Chinese language, which has rising and falling of pitch in addition to syllable to dictate meaning. In scenes or sections of the action where there's fight scenes or movement, you will hear percussion. And also at the beginning and ends of scenes, you will also hear percussion. Cultural considerations for Beijing opera. Much of what you see in an opera visually is symbolic and stylized. There are several major roles, of which I've listed four: the Sheng or the male, the Dan or the female, these are the heroes and the heroine, the Jing, the painted face characters, and Shu, comedians. Here's a military scene from a Beijing opera performance. Featured in many modern films, of which the most famous is Farewell, My Concubine, my favorite Chinese film of all time, and M. Butterfly. And as far as other connections, you're all aware of the Disney film Mulan. It is based on a Chinese folktale and opera. Here are some various scenes from Beijing opera. There's an actor at the top left, a warrior battle scene in the upper middle. A female heroine prepares her makeup. The bottom right, you see a Beijing opera orchestra. And then you see two characters there just to the right of these captions. And just a reminder, males traditionally played all roles. All the male and female roles were played by males. Our final stop in China is a revolutionary Beijing opera. Our first impressions is that it sounds somewhat Western, and there's a very modern display of theater, so modern clothing, not the stylization you find in traditional opera. Orally, you hear a combination of traditional Chinese instruments along with modern instruments that you would find in the Western orchestra, like the violin. And many things are taken from Western music, including harmony. Here's a scene from the Beijing opera called Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. Cultural considerations and connections. The years 1966 to 1976 were the most tumultuous in modern Chinese history. This is where Mao tried to turn society on its head and put the poor peasants in charge of the country. As a result, scholars, musicians were sent out to work in the fields. They created 8 model works that they felt would further the philosophy of communism. And in the 1990s, or 1989, you're probably aware that there was a large protest for democracy in Tiananmen Square, which was ruthlessly put down. China today has a combination of communism and capitalism in its system, but there are still a lot of restrictions on things like free speech. Revolutionary opera ironically borrows many elements from Western classical music, such as harmony, forms, and instruments. Our next stop is Mongolia, where we're going to hear one of the most interesting and fascinating styles of world music, throat singing or overtone singing. In Mongolia and neighboring Tuva, where this music is sung, this style of singing is called kume, and it is the music of nomadic herders who live on the steppes and the plains and the mountains in this region of Mongolia and north across the Altai Mountains in Tuva, where I spent several weeks studying this style of music. This is the area where the famous Emperor Genghis Khan and his grandson Kublai Khan ruled and conquered much of Asia and the Middle East. Today, there's a significant amount of Soviet influence as well as the Chinese influence. So our first impressions of overtone singing are that you hear 2 different sounds, a low grumble and a high whistle. This is produced by one person singing 2 different tones at once. It is possible with the human voice to sing a low drone and using the vocal cavity to accentuate the high overtones that are present in all sounds. And the Mongolians are experts in this. There are many different types of throat singing or kume. The most common ones that you may hear are a low fundamental with a loud high overtone, and conversely, a loud low grumble with a soft overtone. All these are done by singing low fundamentals and using your voice and throat to create these different timbres and tones.
За, уруулын көмнөөс эхлэе. За одоо тагнан комыг. Хамрын комыг.
Gladl.
За одоо чэйжний өндөй комыг.
Cultural considerations and connections. There's a spiritual connection to this music. It is felt that by singing this music, you're able to embody the spirit of nature and animals. And it is also sung, as I said before, in the Republic of Tuva in Russia. Both these areas have been highly attractive to Westerners who have traveled there and learned how to sing this music, including myself. Some of the traditional groups that I've spent time with and who perform in the United States are Hunhurtu and Alash. And there's a really famous film called Genghis Blues that chronicles the traveling of a blind singer, American singer, African-American singer from San Francisco, who learned how to do throat singing on his own, to Tuva to participate in the international festival of Hume and to compete. And he won a special prize there. And some of you may know the modern band, the modern Mongolia band called The Who, which is a great takeoff on, the rock band. This is a band of young Mongolian musicians who are combining throat singing with heavy metal. Our next stop is Korea, where we will explore a genre of musical storytelling called Pansori. Korea has a lot of influence historically and culturally from its neighbors China and Japan. The Korean War from 1950 to 1952 split Korea in two halves, the northern part, which is communist, and the southern part, which is capitalist. As you listen to this Pansori example, you will hear a very, I would say, bluesy kind of wailing voice and drum in the background with a voice of the drummer encouraging the singer. Vocally, the singer sings with many different vocal techniques, including a wide vibrato and some raspy kinds of timbres, and it's a combination of singing and speech in this example. The drum is called the puk.
멀리 울적에 그때여 핫도님은 춘향님을 살필 적에 차량한 울음소리 춘향 어머지 곡성 이로나 내가 의사한 것을 우리 선영덕인 줄만 알았더니 여기 와서 보니 우리 장모의 비는 정성이 반절이나 되는 모양이로구나. 내가 이 모양으로 들어가면 저 늙은이 성질의 필경 야단이 날 모양이니 내 한번 속여볼 수밖에 없지. 일부러 술 잔뜩 먹고 주정한 사람 목소리를 내서 여러 가지로 한번 불러보겠다. 이러느라 이러느라 기 아무도 없느냐 이러느라.
Cultural considerations and connections. Pansori is a traditional kind of storytelling that has been preserved, and there hasn't been a development of the style. So it is considered sort of, in some respects, a museum piece that's preserved to represent Korean musical identity. As far as connections, many of you may be familiar with the Korean song Arirang. It's the most famous Korean song, of which there's many, many versions. You might have heard it performed at the Olympics when they were held in Seoul. It's a beautiful song that talks about longing and separation, and many people see it as a symbol of the separation between North and South Korea. Many people compare Pansori to American blues because of the emotional intensity and the vocal technique and the kind of storytelling that it represents. This emotional intensity that you find in Korean music, many people feel that it is the reason that Korean music and particularly K-pop are so popular these days. Next, let's move to Japan, where we'll hear two different styles of music, Gagaku and the music accompanying Kabuki theater. Japan is an island nation with a dense population. There's a considerable history of isolation in Japan, which was broken in the 1850s when the US Navy came to Japan and demanded trade. Historically, there were military leaders called shoguns and warrior priests called samurai, who still exert an important role in the culture of the island. There's a style of Zen Buddhism in Japan that talks about getting maximum effect from minimum means. As a result, you'll hear a lot more silence in Japanese music with strongly articulated notes. And it requires a lot of calm and attentive listening on the listener's part to understand and to learn to appreciate the music. Gagaku is one such style of music from Japan that really requires a lot of time to appreciate the sound of it. I remember completely being baffled when I first heard Gagaku music, but over time I've come to love it. First impressions, suspension of time, very awkward long silences, alternating with long sustained tones with an extremely low rhythmic density. Nonetheless, this piece is in a very, very, very slow duple meter, and the timbres of the instruments, like the hichiriki, which is an oboe kind of instrument, and the sho, which is a bamboo mouth organ, are very distinctive. Cultural considerations and connections. Gagaku means elegant music. It's ceremonial music that follows in the Confucian tradition. And it is the oldest continuing performed musical tradition in the world, going back to about the 8th century AD. The movement of the players on stage and basically everything they do is ritualistic. The French composer Olivier Messiaen was fascinated with this music and composed a piece called Sept Hakai that uses influences from Gagaku. Next, let's explore a little bit of Kabuki theater. Our first impressions of this music is the twangy lute to the left called the shamisen, and some vocal sounds in the background, yos and hos. The chobo is a narrator, and he's accompanied by the shamisen. There may be several narrators or singers, accompanied by several of these plucked lutes called shamisens. You also find drums and a flute called a nokan. You can see all these instruments there at your left. This is a classic popular style of theater that's still popular today. Even today, all the roles are played by male actors, which includes some puppet performances. As far as connections, there's a style of kabuki called super kabuki, which is a modern interpretation of kabuki and uses stories from manga and anime such as Naruto and One Piece. Our last stop today is in Tibet, where we'll hear a Tibetan Buddhist ritual. Tibet is the rooftop of the world, the highest country in the world elevation-wise. A kind of Buddhism called Tantric Buddhism is practiced here, and many of you are aware of its spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. A lot of Tibetans have been spread throughout the world because of religious persecution in China. So you find a Tibetan population in many countries, including one here in the United States. This Buddhist ritual has foghorn-sounding trumpets and very guttural chants. The trumpets overlap, and occasionally you will hear punctuating percussion. To the right, you see Tibetan monks playing cymbals. Take a listen. There's two different Tibetan trumpets in this slide. On the left, the Dongchen, a long metal trumpet. These are the ones heard in the listening example. On the right, you'll see the Kandang, which is made out of metal as well. Very interestingly, the Dangkar, a more traditional trumpet, is made out of a human bone. Cultural considerations and connections. Tibetan Buddhists believe in reincarnation. They believe the body is merely a cup that holds the spiritual nectar. So when the body dies, the spirit is released and housed in a new form. Trumpets have much symbolism. They're used to either drive away evil deities or call benevolent ones, and the deep sound of the Dongchen is said to imitate the trumpeting of the elephant, which is considered a powerful animal. The chanting and vocal sounds and deep guttural utterances are said to represent the fundamental sound of the human body when all else is in complete silence. Buddhism and chanting are increasingly getting more popular in the West. I've included several videos that I would like you to watch. All of them are short. There's a great fun scene from Kung Fu Hustle that uses the Guqin. And there's a scene, my favorite scene, from Pharaoh, My Concubine, where the two young proteges who are learning how to sing Chinese opera, but have run away from the school because they are being treated poorly, end up at an opera where they change their minds and they fall in love with the opera all over again and are willing to go back despite punishment. You will also see a clip of revolutionary opera, which shows how different it is from the traditional Beijing opera. I've also included a clip of throat singing so that you can hear various techniques, as well as one of the songs from The Who, which is the Mongolian rock band I talked about. There's also a clip of Pansori music so that you can hear and see how the singer sings and interacts with the drummer on stage. And a Gagaku clip so that you can see how ritualistic and how formal the performance of that music is. Finally, there's a scene from Kabuki theater. I hope you enjoy all of this.